So I have seen a lot of confusion within the Devil May Cry community on what is actually canon to the series and what was changed as more games came out.
Do you have to ask?
This video here is to set everything straight. So first, let's get into the order of everything. So how do we know the order of the series, the timelines of the series that take place? This question didn't manifest until Devil May Cry 4 came out and we see Dante again. Because originally the first game came out, so obviously no questions on timeline there. Then the second game came out, so you would just assume that it follows the previous game. Then when the third game came out, it does a pretty good job showing you how Dante is dressing up in the original DMC outfit. But when 4 came out, it raised some questions. Because Dante was left in the underworld at the end of Devil May Cry 2. Well, luckily, the Before the Nightmare novel explains that Dante was able to escape the underworld with the Shard of the Yamato, which allowed him to create a portal into the human world and return. So this explains how Dante got out, but doesn't really solidify between DMC2 and DMC4 on which was the later game in the timeline. Well, in Devil May Cry 5, we are able to watch a recap that explains the order of the games for us. This shows that the order is DMC3, DMC1, DMC2, DMC4, and then 5. Now that we know how Dante got back to the human world and confirmed the timeline, let's get into some of the details that I have seen some confusion on. How about we move on to the novels? Here you can see the list of the novels, and let's go in order. The very first thing that takes place is the Devil May Cry 3 manga. Originally, there were supposed to be 3 of these novels, but only 2 of them ever came out. These novels take place at least 1 year before the third game. Luckily, there isn't any contradictions from these novels. There are just gaps that we are left to speculate on since the third volume wasn't ever released. Then after this, we have the third game, which is going to be all canon as well. So, is the original Devil May Cry novel canon with DMC3 coming out later? Next, we have the original DMC3 novel that takes place literally right before the first cutscene when Trish arrives on her motorcycle. This is where we have some changes, and originally the story has a character named Gilver and leads you to believe that this is Dante's brother Virgil. But keep in mind, this novel was written and released after the first game was released. Then the third game wasn't released until years later to add confusion to this. What we do get to find out in the Before the Nightmare novel, and this novel takes place right before Devil May Cry 5, is that Mundus had created what were called Black Knights, and would send them to attack Dante before Virgil would attack Mundus in the underworld. The thought that I am getting at is that Gilver isn't outright called out by name here, but we can believe that Gilver was one of these Black Knights that Mundus created, and once Mundus was able to get Virgil to resist much less, he would become the Nello Angelo for Mundus. Obviously, Virgil would be the most powerful Black Knight Mundus had been involved with, and in the case of Gilver, it doesn't really impact anything if we believe that he was another of the Black Knights or that he was completely removed from the story altogether. Big takeaway here is that Gilver is not Virgil as it originally made us to believe. Although I like the idea of Gilver, so maybe we can believe he's canon. The next novel that takes place is the Devil May Cry 2 novel, and this takes place right before the second game. This novel doesn't have anything that contradicts any of the further lore, and there are a lot of really cool things that take place within the novel. That and everything else I am touching on here will be in my all DMC lore explained video I am working on. But yeah, this novel is canon. Deadly Fortune 1 and 2. These novels take place within Devil May Cry 4 and actually adds more insight on why Dante is there and why Trish is disguised as Gloria. Then it talks about how Nero got his Devilbringer arm and more details that will be covered in the next video. Overall here, yes, Deadly Fortune in DMC 4 is also canon, but with more details that aren't covered in the game. Is Devil May Cry 2 canon? So I actually saw this. This was an interesting question that I received. And I believe it's mostly because folks just don't like the second game altogether.
It's not bad, it's just not good.
But after everything that we have gone over, yes, the second game that was produced by Capcom and is also called Devil May Cry 2 is, guess what, canon.
Your lucky streak continues, Granny.
This story doesn't really progress much as far as the grand scheme of things. It's more of a side adventure that Dante goes through, but we do meet Lucia and Matayer, who are in the Before the Nightmare novels. Along with Argisax being the final boss in the game, it is mentioned that Dante did defeat him as well during the time that he met and helped Lucia and Matayer. We also know that Argisax is canon because the fight between Dante and Argisax is mentioned in the Before the Nightmare novel that we're going to be going over. As some of you may know, there is a Devil May Cry anime that came out in 2007. And then there is another anime that is coming out soon. The one I'm going to be touching on is the original one. The anime takes place somewhere between Devil May Cry 1 and Devil May Cry 4, which, remember, it goes 3, 1, 2, 4, so it's not as big a gap as you might think. But we do know is that Dante's sword, the Rebellion, is awakened at this point. Dante is wielding his signature pistols, Ebony and Ivory, and Lady and Trish are both in the anime. Lady joins Dante after the third game, and Trish joins after the first game. In the anime, this is where the two powerful women meet for the first time, because by the beginning of Devil May Cry 4, they've already met and know each other. Then, to get more specific on where this anime can land as far as the timeline, there are two demons named Baal and Modius. They were trained directly by Sparta, and they would go on to fight Dante, and so as soon as the fight starts, Dante shares that he is getting excited because he hasn't fought anyone that was trained by his father, where I believe that this could place the anime right after the first game, and before the second game. Because of the second novel that we touched on, where Chen the Cannibal overwhelmed Dante with his father's swordsmanship, but in the end, they could be interchangeable on this taking place before Devil May Cry 2 or 1. And then there's a DMC reboot. This one is very much not canon to the main series, but I thought I would mention it. Dante and Virgil's story is pretty wild on how they interact. Mundus is also wild here. I'm going to leave it at that. There isn't a spot that you can slip this in that makes it make sense for so many reasons. Is Peak of Combat canon? If so, how is it since Nero is going to be in it? This is one question I see all the time, and I am going to prove how this is canon. Devil May Cry Peak of Combat is a mobile game that was released across the pond quite a while ago and is finally making its way to the rest of us in the West. The game is being developed by Nebula Joy and has the official production team from the Devil May Cry team within Capcom supporting them. To add to this, it's noted that this story is taking place between the third game and the first. This is when Dante is in the human world with Lady and Virgil is in the underworld. I'm sure you have seen that Nero is in the game as well, and to give my opinion, Nero being in the game should be treated like how Virgil is in the special edition of the fourth game. Because he isn't really the one that goes to fight Sanctus and save Kyrie, he was just added to have the ability to do Nero and Dante's original missions as a fan service. Another thing I have seen is the secret cutscene that is within the third game, and Virgil is going to go off to fight Mundus. This can take place after Peak of Combat to keep Virgil in the underworld fighting demons, or they could have it be that Mundus won the fight and Virgil's appearance in Peak of Combat would be after he was defeated with Mundus trying to get him to submit to being his Nello Angelo. Oh, another thing I saw was Angels in Devil May Cry. This is one that I believe has been confused with fans with the DMC reboot game coming out, and then information got crossed on which DMC has angels and which one doesn't. We know that in the first DMC 3 novel that everything that we know is split between the demon world and the human world. There are references of angels, but it is more of an idea to them. But there is no proof of their existence within the games, novel, show, or any other media. To further cement this, there is a Q&A with the action director Yuji Shimomura and director Hideaki Itsuno around the time that DMC4 Special Edition comes out, and they get into how they understand the confusion that a devil world exists without heaven or some other home for angels to exist. With Peak of Combat coming out and the Netflix anime as well, I will cover these all as well. Appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one. Also, don't forget that I have the lore video coming out that will get into the details of everything we touched on here. Appreciate you. Bye.